All right, everyone, let's talk about a pretty important piece of the photo making process, the camera. Like I mentioned in the previous video, there are a great many options on the market today. Some photographers will tell you that you must shoot with a certain type of setup or a certain brand. I'm not one of them. There are several different types of cameras on the market today and options within each type. And then there are different brands too. I have taken photos with, I think, all the types of cameras and a lot of the brands. Each has its own benefits, and likewise, each has its own drawbacks. In this video, we will go through the types of cameras: phone cameras, point-and-shoot cameras, DSLRs, and mirrorless interchangeable lens cameras. You will learn some of the advantages and disadvantages of each, and we will discuss sensor size as well, and what that is. We will get more in-depth on considerations for purchasing a camera or lens, how to make those decisions. That'll be in a video later in this module. In this video, we're establishing your vocabulary, at least the beginnings of it. The types of cameras out there, drawbacks, benefits, and above all, know that all cameras take photos. If you're in the market to purchase a camera, by the end of this module, you will have a better grasp on making the right decision for you. And then there's an exercise at the end of this module that will help even more. Before we move into the different types of cameras, let's talk sensor size. You may have heard terms like full frame and APS-C or cropped sensor. But what is the sensor and what do those terms mean exactly? Your digital camera has a sensor. It's the image sensor. It receives the light coming into the camera through the lens, and along with software and a processor and such, it records the image. The sizes of those sensors are standardized throughout the industry, but there are different sizes of sensors. We'll get into the implications of each of the sizes in a video later in this module, but you need to know the general idea of these sizes as we discuss the different types of cameras in this video. Okay, here is a chart that will help me explain. Keep in mind that these aren't the actual sizes because depending on the screen that you are watching this video on, the video will be scaled differently, but you can see the comparisons. Let's start with full frame. This is generally the largest sensor you will see out there. I am going to put an asterisk here and tell you that there are larger sensors, which I will address a little bit in a few minutes. But anyway, full frame. This is the equivalent to 35mm film, meaning that the sensor is the same size as a frame of 35mm film. Next is cropped sensor, which is also called APS-C. As you can see, this is smaller than full frame, and you will actually notice two boxes here. Most brands defined APS-C as this size, but Canon defines it slightly differently. In practice, the two are virtually indistinguishable. The next type is micro 4/3. Next is the 1-inch sensor. The sensor itself doesn't actually measure 1 inch, but that's what it's called. Next is actually a group of a couple sizes, 1/2.3 and 1/2.5 inch. These two are so similar that I identified them on the same line here, and you can see that it is significantly smaller than the 1-inch sensor. And then last, you'll see one last box. Again, this is a group of sizes, 1/2.6 inches to 1/3 inch. As a guideline, we are looking at larger sensors having higher image quality and better low light performance. And then of course we expect to spend more the larger the sensor. Keep in mind that's a guideline, but it's certainly not a rule. I have at least 1,000 reasons why you can capture a high quality image with a small sensor and a low quality image with a full frame sensor. Before we move on, there are technically a few other sizes of sensors out there, though they are less common in today's market. I've kept this discussion to sizes that are relevant to you today. That being said, the one that bears mentioning here, because we are starting to see it more in digital photography, is medium format. It is larger than full frame, twice as large in fact. Medium format has only recently gained some momentum in digital photography, and there are very few options out right now. So we are not going to be discussing it any further in this course. I did, however, want to make you aware of it as a part of the overall landscape of camera options out there. As you are advancing in photography, or if you are particularly interested in medium format, let me know. I could possibly add something about it to a future, more advanced photography course. Now on to the camera types and how those sensor sizes fit into these different types. One note I need to make here is that the landscape of types of cameras and the sensors in those types of cameras is evolving and changing. I am providing you with the information available right now. But keep in mind that digital photography development seems to be moving faster and faster every month. First, let's consider the camera that we all probably have within arm's reach of us at all times, our mobile phone's camera. These contain the smallest sensor on our chart, typically. The exact size will actually just depend on your phone's brand or model, but for the purposes of our course, as we are comparing these to the much larger sensors and dedicated cameras, we're treating all phones the same. Now, don't underestimate your phone's camera. The cameras in phones these days are getting better and better. Some have multiple lenses built in and multiple modes built in that you can use for different purposes. For example, many phones have a portrait mode, which uses software to pick out the subject of your image, smooth out the skin a bit, and blur out the background. Regardless of the type of phone you have or what modes that you can access on it, the basics of photography are the same, and at least for the purposes of this course, it may be all you need. There's an old saying that is, the best camera is the one that you have in your hand. And the big benefit of using your phone's camera is that you don't have to spend any additional money to get started. On the flip side, while the quality of phone cameras is certainly improving, you don't have as much flexibility in changing settings with a phone's camera, which can limit you in terms of getting the final result that you want. And you may also find the depth of the image from your phone lacking. For example, you will often see that the background behind the subject of a photo is blurry, kind of like in this video. We'll discuss later in this course exactly how that happens, but for now, know that it is that blurriness that in part gives the photo a sense of depth. It looks more three-dimensional, even though we're talking about a two-dimensional image. And it also draws the viewer's attention. I mentioned portrait mode a moment ago, but that pretty much only works with faces, and the quality and photo options vary substantially from phone to phone, but often you won't be able to achieve that look. We will, however, discuss later in this course how to compensate for that, at least somewhat. So using your phone as a camera is not a deal breaker. I've taken some photos with my phone that I love, so don't be concerned if that's all you have. Just know that there are certain things, like astrophotography or maybe fast action, that you will have difficulty doing. Also, if you want to be able to zoom way into your image and still see lots of detail, the phone camera photos aren't going to give you that. That being said, let's talk through your other options. Next is the point and shoot camera. These can vary in size from pocket-sized to DSLR-sized. They can also vary just as much in price. In fact, you can spend as much or more than an entry-level interchangeable lens camera. These point-and-shoot cameras will usually have a sensor in the 1/2.3 and 1/2.5 inch range. However, you will see point-and-shoot cameras with a 1-inch sensor or even an APS-C sensor. With a point-and-shoot camera, you can usually zoom some amount, which may be a step up from your phone's camera, and zooming will provide you some flexibility in how and what you are photographing. Different cameras will zoom different amounts. There is one on the market right now, the Nikon P1000, that will zoom up to an equivalent focal length of 3,000 millimeters, and that's a lot. Now, it makes the camera quite large, and that amount of zoom is unusual, but you get the idea. Some cameras are pocketable, some are larger. In fact, you'll hear the term compact point and shoot and the term bridge camera. You can imagine that the compact cameras are smaller, they generally have less zoom, and then bridge cameras are often just as big and similarly shaped to entry-level DSLRs, and they have a more broad zoom range. When looking at the zoom range of a camera, be mindful of optical zoom versus digital zoom. Digital zoom is nothing more than cropping your image, just like you would in editing software in your computer. while optical zoom physically uses the glass of the lens to get your view in closer to the subject. That way you're still able to retain the full image from your camera's sensor, and that means better image quality and a sharper image. In general, the benefit of zooming is that you might be able to take photos of things that you wouldn't be able to physically get closer to, or you can back away from your subject a little bit or a lot, which provides you with a more natural perspective. One other thing that's nice about point and shoot cameras is that they are often relatively small, which makes them easy to carry with you. Family vacations, an outing to the museum, hiking, smaller package, less weight. That might mean that you will bring it with you more often and use it more. Now, quality is certainly a consideration here and is going to vary depending on the camera you select. However, with all point and shoot cameras, you will find your images similarly lacking in depth to photos taken with your phone, like I discussed a moment ago, at least the ones with the smaller sensors. This has to do with that small sensor. Again, there are ways to compensate for it, but expect that without those extra measures, you will often end up with something that just kind of looks like a snapshot. And that may be okay for you. Moving on to interchangeable lens cameras. Here we are talking about camera bodies where the lens is separate. You will often have one body and numerous lenses. But we'll discuss lenses in our next video. Here we're only going to discuss the body. This is where you will notice a big jump in quality and flexibility. Take note of the significant increase in sensor size from phone point and shoot sensors to the sensors of interchangeable lens cameras, 1 inch through full frame. If you are looking to move forward into professional work or you want the most flexibility, the interchangeable lens body and lenses are probably where you're going to want to spend your money. There are two types of cameras in this category, DSLRs and mirrorless. Let's start with DSLRs. DSLR stands for Digital Single Lens Reflex. You will find that you have two sensor sizes within the DSLR umbrella, full frame and APS-C. There are a great many DSLR models out there and a few brands making them. You really can't go wrong with any of them that are on the market today. Though it should be noted that with the advent and advancement of mirrorless interchangeable lens cameras, which we will discuss next, the DSLR is not the king of photography as it once was. It can be argued that the future of the continued development of DSLRs is uncertain. That being said, only time will tell. Now, a couple of benefits of DSLRs is that you will generally get better battery life. Also, for most brands, you will find a more broad range of lenses because DSLRs have been around for longer than the mirrorless options. On to those mirrorless interchangeable lens cameras. These are very similar to DSLRs, but as the name suggests, they lack the mirror that you will find in a DSLR. This allows them to be quieter, faster in some ways, often more compact, but they also tend to be more expensive than their full frame and APS-C DSLR counterparts. You can, however, purchase bodies which have smaller sensors, namely 1 inch and micro four thirds, like I mentioned a moment ago. Mirrorless cameras are a newer technology than DSLRs though, so depending on the brand that you're looking at, the available collection of lenses and accessories is not as deep as you would have with DSLRs, though it is growing practically every month with new releases. A quick note on mirrorless fixed lens cameras. You may find these in your research. These are mirrorless cameras similar to those we've just discussed, but you only have one lens that is fixed onto the camera, and it is a fixed focal length, meaning that it doesn't zoom. This is a fun option for photography, but you do lose flexibility in focal lengths because you can't change the lens. That can, however, simplify things, and I personally enjoy these cameras. You will find mirrorless fixed lens cameras in several different sensor sizes, up to and including full frame. Okay, everyone, that was a lot of information, I know. We will discuss more considerations when choosing a type of camera in a video after we discuss lenses, which is the next video. Learning about lenses will certainly be helpful for those of you that are using an interchangeable lens camera, but also for those of you using any sort of camera that zooms. So, I'll meet you in the next video.